A swept-wing, single-seat fighter jet powered by a powerful J-47 engine, with a top speed of over 680 miles per hour, armed with 6.50 caliber M3 Browning machine guns. The F-86 Sabre dominated the skies over Korea during the 50s, earning it the name the MIG killer.
North American aviation had produced the propeller-powered P-51 Mustang in World War II, which saw combat against some of the first operational jet fighters. By late 1944, North American proposed its first jet fighter to the U.S. Navy, which became the FJ-1 Fury. It was an unexceptional transitional jet fighter that had a straight wing derived from the P-51. Initial proposals to meet a United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, requirement for a medium-range, single-seat, high-altitude, jet-powered day escort fighter-bomber were drafted in mid-1944. In early 1945, North American Aviation submitted 4 designs. The USAAF selected one design over the others and granted North American a contract to build 3 examples of the XP-86, experimental pursuit. Deleting specific requirements from the FJ-1 Fury, coupled with other modifications, allowed the XP-86 to be lighter and considerably faster than the Fury, with an estimated top speed of 582 miles per hour, 937 kilometers per hour, versus the Fury's 547 miles per hour, 880 kilometers per hour. Despite the gain in speed, early studies revealed the XP-86 would have the same performance as its rivals, the XP-80 and XP-84. Because these rival designs were more advanced in their development stages, it was feared that the XP-86 would be cancelled. Crucially, the XP-86 was not able to meet the required top speed of 600 miles per hour, 970 kilometers per hour. North American had to quickly devise a radical change that could leapfrog its rivals. The North American F-86 Sabre was the first American aircraft to take advantage of flight research data seized from the German aerodynamicists at the end of World War II. These data showed that a thin, swept wing could greatly reduce drag and delay compressibility problems that had bedeviled fighters such as the Lockheed P-38 Lightning when approaching the speed of sound. By 1944, German engineers and designers had established the benefits of swept wings based on experimental designs dating back to 1940. A study of the data showed that a swept wing would solve their speed problem, while a slat on the wing's leading edge that extended at low speeds would enhance low-speed stability. Because development of the XP-86 had reached an advanced stage, the idea of changing the sweep of the wing was met with resistance from some senior North American staff. Despite stiff opposition, after good results were obtained in wind tunnel tests, the swept wing concept was eventually adopted. Performance requirements were met by incorporating a 35 degrees swept back wing, using modified NACA 4-digit airfoils, NACA 0009.5-64 at the root and NACA 0008.5-64 at the tip, with an automatic slat design based on that of the Messerschmitt Me 262 and an electrically adjustable stabilizer, another feature of the Me 262A. Many Sabres had the 6-3 wing, a fixed leading edge with a 6-inch extended cord at the root and a 3-inch extended cord at the tip, retrofitted after combat experience was gained in Korea. This modification changed the wing airfoils to the NACA 000964 modified configuration at the root and the NACA 0008.1-64 mod at the tip. The XP-86 prototype, which led to the F-86 Sabre, was rolled out on 8 August 1947. The first flight occurred on 1 October 1947 with George Welch at the controls, flying from Merrick Dry Lake, now Edwards AFB, California. The F-86 was produced as both a fighter interceptor and fighter bomber. Several variants were introduced over its production life, with improvements and different armament implemented. The XP-86 was fitted with a General Electric J35C3 jet engine that produced 4,000 lb-f, 18 kilonewtons, of thrust. This engine was built by GM's Chevrolet division until production was turned over to Allison. The General Electric J47GE7 engine was used in the F-86A1, producing a thrust of 5,200 lb-f, 23 kilonewtons, while the General Electric J73GE3 engine of the F86H produced 9,250 lbf, 41 kilonewtons, of thrust. The fighter-bomber version, F86H, could carry up to 2,000 pounds, 907 kg, of bombs, including an external fuel-type tank that could carry napalm. Unguided 2.75-inch, 70 mm, rockets were used on some fighters on training missions, but 5-inch, 127 mm, rockets were later carried on combat operations. The F-86 could also be fitted with a pair of external jettisonable jet fuel tanks, 4 on the F-86F beginning in 1953, that extended the range of the aircraft. Both the interceptor and fighter-bomber versions carried 6 0.50 in, 12.7 mm, M3 Browning machine guns with electrically boosted feed in the nose. Later versions of the F-86H carried 4 20 mm, 0.79-inch, cannon instead of machine guns. Firing at a rate of 1,200 rounds per minute, the 0.50-inch, 13 mm, guns were harmonized to converge at 1,000 feet, 300 meters, in front of the aircraft, using armor-piercing, AP, and armor-piercing incendiary, API, rounds, with one armor-piercing incendiary tracer, APIT, for every 5 AP or API rounds. The API rounds used during the Korean War contained magnesium, which were designed to ignite upon impact, but burned poorly above 35,000 feet, 11,000 meters, as oxygen levels were insufficient to sustain combustion at that height. Initial planes were fitted with the Mark 18 manual ranging computing gun sight. The last 24 F-86A5 NAS and F-86S were equipped with the A1CM gunsight AN, APG-30 radar, which used radar to automatically compute a target's range, which later proved to be advantageous against MiG opponents over Korea. The F-86 entered service with the USAF in 1949, joining the 1st Fighter Wing's 94th Fighter Squadron and became the primary air-to-air jet fighter used by the Americans in the Korean War. While earlier straight-winged jets such as the P-80 and F-84 initially achieved air victories, when the swept-wing Soviet MiG-15 was introduced in November 1950, it outperformed all UN-based aircraft. In response, 3 squadrons of F-86S were rushed to the Far East in December. Early variants of the F-86 could not outturn MiG-15s, but they could outdive them. The MiG-15 was superior to early F-86 models in ceiling, acceleration, rate of climb, and zoom. With the introduction of the F-86F in 1953, however, the two aircraft were more closely matched, with many combat-experienced pilots claiming a marginal superiority for the F-86F. The heavier firepower of the MiG, and many other contemporary fighters, was addressed by Project Gunval, which saw the combat testing of 7 F-86Fs each armed with 4 20mm T-160 cannons. Such F-86S were designated as F-86F2s. Despite being able to fire only 2 of the 4 20mm cannon at a time, the experiment was considered a success and signaled the end of the decades-long use of the Browning .50 caliber in the air-to-air role. The MiGs flown from bases in Manchuria by Chinese, North Korean, and Soviet VVS pilots were pitted against 2 squadrons of the 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing Forward based at K-14, Kimpo, Korea. In October 1951, the Soviets managed to recover a downed Sabre, and in their investigation of the type they concluded that the Sabre's advantage in combat was due to the APG-30 gunsight that facilitated accurate fire at longer ranges. Many of the American pilots were experienced World War II veterans, while the North Koreans and the Chinese lacked combat experience, thus accounting for much of the F-86's success. However, United Nations pilots suspected many of the MiG-15s were being flown by experienced Soviet pilots who also had combat experience in World War II. Former communist sources now acknowledge Soviet pilots initially flew the majority of MiG-15s that fought in Korea, and dispute that more MiG-15s than F-86S were shot down in air combat. Later in the war, North Korean and Chinese pilots increased their participation as combat flyers. The North Koreans and their allies periodically contested air superiority in MiG Alley, an area near the mouth of the Yalu River, the boundary between Korea and China, over which the most intense air-to-air combat took place. Although the F-86A could be safely flown through Mach 1, the F-86E's all-moving tailplane greatly improved maneuverability at high speeds. The MiG-15 could not safely exceed Mach 0.92, an important disadvantage in near-sonic air combat. Far greater emphasis had been given to the training, aggressiveness, and experience of the F-86 pilots. American Sabre pilots were trained at Nellis, where the casualty rate of their training was so high, they were told, "If you ever see the flag at full staff, take a picture." Despite rules of engagement to the contrary, F-86 units frequently initiated combat over MiG bases in the Manchurian sanctuary. The needs of combat operations balanced against the need to maintain an adequate force structure in Western Europe led to the conversion of the 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing from the F-80 to the F-86 in December 1951. Two fighter bomber wings, the 8th and 18th, converted to the F-86F in the spring of 1953. No. 2 Squadron, South African Air Force, SAAF, also distinguished itself flying F-86s in Korea as part of the 18 FBW. On 17 June 1951, at 1:30 hours, Suwon Air Base was bombed by two Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes. Each PO-2 dropped a pair of fragmentation bombs. One scored a hit on the 802nd Engineer Aviation Battalion's motor pool, damaging some equipment. Two bombs burst on the flight line of the 335th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. One F-86A Sabre, FU 334/49-1334, was struck on the wing and began burning. The fire took hold, gutting the aircraft. Prompt action by personnel who moved aircraft away from the burning Sabre prevented further loss. 8 other Sabres were damaged in the brief attack, 4 seriously. One F-86 pilot was among the wounded. The North Koreans subsequently credited Lieutenant Lee Woon-young with this damaging attack. By the end of hostilities, F-86 pilots were credited with shooting down 792 MiGs for a loss of only 78 Sabres in air-to-air combat, a victory ratio of 10-1. Of the 41 American pilots who earned the designation of ace during the Korean War, all but one flew the F-86 Sabre, the exception being a Navy Vought F-4U Corsair night fighter pilot. However, after the war, the USAF reviewed its figures in an investigation code named Sabre Measure Charlie and downgraded the kill ratio of the North American F-86 Sabre against the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-15 by half. Internally, the USAF accepted that its pilots in fact downed approximately 200 MiGs. The Republic of China Air Force was an early recipient of surplus USAF Sabres. From December 1954 to June 1956, the ROC Air Force received 160 ex-USAF F-86 F-1NA through F-86 F-30NA fighters. By June 1958, the Republic of China on Taiwan had built up an impressive fighter force, with 320 F-86Fs and 7 RF-86Fs having been delivered. Sabres and MiGs were shortly to battle each other in the skies of Asia once again in the Second Taiwan Strait crisis. In August 1958, the Chinese Communists of the People's Republic of China attempted to force the nationalists off of the islands of Quemoy and Matsu by shelling and blockade. ROCAF F-86Fs flying combat air patrol over the islands found themselves confronted by People's Liberation Army Air Force MiG-15s and MiG-17s, and numerous dogfights resulted. During these battles, the ROCAF Sabres introduced a new element into aerial warfare. Under a secret effort designated Operation Black Magic, the U.S. Navy had provided the ROC with the AIM-9 Sidewinder, its first infrared homing air-to-air missile, which was just entering service with the United States. A small team from VMF 323, a Marine FJ-4 Fury squadron with later assistance from China Lake and North American Aviation, initially modified 20 of the F-86 Sabres to carry a pair of Sidewinders on underwing launch rails and instructed the ROC pilots in their use flying profiles with USAF F-100s simulating the MiG-17. The MiGs enjoyed an altitude advantage over the Sabres, as they had in Korea, and PLOF MiGs routinely cruised over the ROCAF Sabres, only engaging when they had a favorable position. The Sidewinder took away that advantage and proved to be devastatingly effective against the MiGs. The F-86 Sabre is considered one of the most lethal aircraft that has ever served the USAF, RAAF and many other air forces. It had a remarkable service life, spanning from the Korean War to the development of modified airframes for the Canadian and Australian Air Forces, and finally, to its retirement in Bolivia in 1994. Throughout its operational history, the Sabre achieved over 500 kills, earning the nickname, the MIG Killer. The F86 remains one of the most iconic aircraft ever made.